Well, welcome and good morning to, who do you say I am? I had to look down. Encountering the New Testament. Yeah, this is the first of many sessions throughout the 2024-2025 program year. We're your hosts, Margaret Fox and Matt Skinner. And hi to folks who are online in the live stream. These are also recorded. We'll talk a bit later about how you can access those. God forbid if you ever have to miss a Sunday. But if you were around last year, we talked about the Older Testament. This year, it's the Newer Testament. And we're really excited about this. And today's largely a kickoff. Hopefully not too many first day of school nervousness vibes, but it will be kind of an introductory thing. Again, there's 4 chairs I see in the front. If people want to come forward, there's also a stack in the back of some spares if people need any of those. All right, any other open chairs I'm not seeing? If there's an open chair next to you, you might want to raise your hand or point or something. All right, yes, all about making friends today. Name tags are there just to help you get a sense of who's at your table with you and things like that. Margaret, I'm here. I think it's your turn.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent. All right, so that's a Matt level microphone. Here we go. So it is good to be back together. I'm going to start us off by talking a little bit about what we are up to this program year in adult education and what this class in particular is going to be like, and to do a little bit of comparison to last year. Some of you, maybe not all of you, were here last year for our series on the good, the bad, and the uncanny, exploring the Older Testament. And it's not a prereq, okay? So if you didn't do that class, you can still come to this one. If you are interested in that class, it's all available online, but it's not a prereq. This class can stand alone. But I do want to give a little bit of a setup on comparing the Older Testament and the Newer Testament to give us some idea of what to expect this year during our time together. So I am going to move us along here, and I'm going to start by looking at our titles. So coming up with the title for the class is always the thing that takes Matt and me the longest. Are you having a little trouble hearing in the back? Okay, it's better now? All right. So coming up with a title always takes us the longest. It's usually about August before we know what we're going to call this class, and sometimes we decide one thing and we change it to another, but there's something to the names that we've chosen for these two. So last year, we had the good, the bad, and the uncanny, right? Which was talking about some of the things in the Older Testament that are comforting, some of the things that are really hard to encounter, and some of the things that are really hard to explain. And our subtitle was Exploring the Older Testament. And that was because we wanted to create a sort of a sense of adventure about it, and a sense that we were entering this world and learning about what it contained. This year, we've got a different title. We've strayed from our Western theme. We were going to call this Once Upon a Time in Judea, but then decided we're not talking about Once Upon a Time, right? This is about the Christ who is alive, who is risen. The question that we named as the title of this course, and actually a question we're going to revisit again and again in this course, and a question that we're going to hear preached about today. If you were at the 8:30 service, this probably is a familiar question. If you're going to 10:30, you'll hear it then. The question is, who do you say I am? It's a question that Jesus asks his disciples, but it also kind of breaks the fourth wall and is a question that is asked of us as we encounter the Newer Testament. And we changed it from exploring to encountering. It's less about exploring the creation of this large world and more about encountering this one event, or really this one person, Jesus Christ. Now, again, we're going to see a ton of different perspectives in the Newer Testament, just like we saw in the Older Testament. There's not going to be a single answer here. But there's going to be a lot of different testimony from numerous individuals and communities of how they are grappling with this question of who is Christ and what does Christ mean for us. So a couple more just comparison and contrast of Older Testament and Newer Testament. So there's a pretty significant difference in the amount of time that we're going to be looking at here. If you remember, if you were here last year, you would have noticed this slide showing up again and again. Is there anybody for whom this looks familiar? And is anybody shuddering a little bit because there were a lot of details on there? Yeah. So this was Matt's timeline that was actually very helpful for situating things in context. And we were looking at a span of about 1,000 years, right? From thinking about when was the Exodus to thinking about when was the Maccabean revolt. There were differences in when were the events taking place, when were the books written that described them, but there was this huge span of time that we were covering. And that's going to be really different this time around, although we will be referring back to those events, right? Because we're going to see again and again in the Newer Testament citations to the Older Testament. This is the books that Jesus and his friends and his opponents are all swimming in, right? So this will come back, but it's not nearly as long of a span of time. Michael Gold, who is our administrative assistant for adult education, is actually here today. We'll hear from him towards the end of today's class. He has prepared once again a timeline that you'll see on the website. And as you can see, this timeline, which sort of is a bit of a generous timeline in that it starts before and ends after the Newer Testament period, but starting in 63 BCE, and the last event on the timeline is 135 CE. So we've got about a 200-year span of historical events that we're thinking about, but even more compressed when we think about when were these texts written, a period from about 50 CE to about 110, 120 CE. So much more compressed time frame, which will affect how we encounter these texts. Geographically, in the Older Testament world, we were very focused on Israel and Judah, right? That area around Jerusalem that you see on this map. But the imperial context was Egypt, there to the southwest, but then the empires were largely in the east: Assyria, Babylonia, Persia. Newer Testament, our geography shifts a bit. And we're going to, again, a lot of the events take place in Galilee and Judea. Notice the different names now, these names being, especially Judea, that shift from Judah to Judea, reflecting a Roman imperial context. And now we're sort of looking at the Mediterranean world. We're looking at the areas of the Hellenistic and then the Roman empires. And we're actually going to see that a lot of our texts aren't just focused in Israel and Judah, but are letters to or take place in a lot of the regions around here. So it's much more of a sort of diaspora setting. We saw intimations of that in the Older Testament. Can anybody remember a book that we read in the Older Testament that took place entirely in Persia? It's named after a woman. Esther, that's right. Matt taught on that, and we had, I think, noisemakers and maybe special hats. But we'll see a lot more books that are written sort of to and about communities that are more far-flung. What else? We will encounter in that, we're talking empires here, we'll encounter a lot of issues of power, of imperial power, and what does it mean to be followers of God in the context of empire. In the Older Testament, we thought a lot about what it meant for Israel and Judah to have been independent political entities, and then to lose that status, and then to return home to something that wasn't quite the same, right? That was a major dynamic in the Older Testament. And we'll see, right up to the events of the Newer Testament. You think about the Roman census when Jesus is born in Luke's gospel. You think about the crucifixion, right? This is a religion unfolding in the context of empire. We'll return to that theme very often. What else do I want to say? Just one last thing to set us up. So I've talked about some comparisons and contrasts. I'm going to return to something that I talked about in my sermon 2 weeks ago in setting this up. We often come in with a framework, right? That there's Old Testament and New Testament, that there is a judgmental God and then a loving God. And one of our hopes is that we'll kind of debunk that division, right? My hope is that last year you encountered a lot of love in the Older Testament. I don't know if it's a fear or a concern. Just the reality is we're going to encounter some judgment in the Newer Testament too, right? We can't sort of shy away from that. We want you guys to experience these books in all of their richness and complexity. I think that's all I want to say by way of set up now, and Matt's going to come up and sort of unfold a little bit more this concept of encountering, what we're trying to get at here, and what that means for the class.
Thank you. So while we're on the slide, like one other thing that kind of leads into where I'm headed as well, so much of the Older Testament is about this nation that's either before its time of coming into being or its preparation of coming into being, the giving of the law, and then trying to hold on to this nation that's constantly beset by much bigger empires and things like that. So it's a very localized, for the most part, the Older Testament, again, localized there around where it says Jerusalem. When we get to the Newer Testament, though, when we get to the first century, Judaism itself is spread out. So on this map, almost every place on this map, there are Jewish communities in the first century. In other words, if you're Jewish, you don't necessarily feel bound to one place. There are also Jews further to the east. And so in the Newer Testament, one of the concerns is how does this new church, this new phenomenon that arises around people's experience of Jesus of Nazareth, how does then that new church, this new community, set down roots in various places, some of which in Jewish communities, in towns, cities, but also in non-Jewish places, right? Among Gentiles would be the term that we use a lot. And how is that a source sometimes of friction, sometimes of new discovery, sometimes of the creation of new communities as well? So there's a lot of culture mixed up in here. Like, we don't want to look at this and just think, oh, this is the Roman Empire, everybody lived the same way. Got a variety of different kinds of places. And we'll get into some of these cities and some of these places and some of those cultural pockets throughout this whole year. So what are we trying to encounter anyway? This is my part of the opening. In many ways, how this is set up, or if you're telling people, hey, we're going to adult ed this morning, what are they talking about this year? Well, you might be saying it's the Bible, which is part of what we're looking at for sure. In a way, we are encountering the Bible, we're reading the Bible. But the goal, at least my goal, and I'm pretty sure this is Margaret's goal too, one of our goals is not just that you come away thinking, well, now I know the Bible better. There are some churches where the Bible is all you need to know, right? That the Bible almost functions as God in some imaginations, right? That the Bible has a kind of perfection to it, some people might say. The Bible is this kind of expression of God's word for all places and all times. And if you want to know who God is, just memorize the Bible and you've got it. Margaret and I don't really believe that that's the best way of understanding what the Bible is about. We are encountering the Bible, but that's never our end goal. Like, the end goal of this is not that you would all know the Bible better. I would argue what we're trying to encounter is Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. Jesus born in Bethlehem, Jesus risen from the dead, Jesus the giver of the Holy Spirit. However you want to talk about this, who is Jesus anyway? So it's not what we're trying to encounter, it's whom are we trying to encounter. In other words, the goal of this is not that we would know our New Testament history better or know the New Testament texts better, although that's part of it, but it's how are we going to encounter Jesus better, and how does the Bible help us perhaps do that? You might know this story. At the end of John's Gospel, we'll do John, I think, in about 5 or 6 weeks. At the end of John's Gospel, one of the resurrection stories, Mary Magdalene has come to the tomb. She's found it empty. She's gone back. 2 disciples have run to the tomb. They've investigated it. They've gone home. And Mary is outside the tomb in a garden, and she's crying. Right? She's weeping because she's utterly confused. She thinks the body has been stolen. She doesn't quite know what's going on. And Jesus appears to her. She doesn't know it's Jesus. She mistakes him for the gardener, in what's kind of a humorous scene. But he says to her, "Why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" And I love that question, right? Whom are you looking for? In a way, he's toying with her a little bit. He eventually does reveal himself to her. But that whom are you looking for me, raises questions that I think are at the heart of what we're going to be doing this year. Like, what does it mean for us to encounter Jesus? That's a huge question, right? Some of that depends on your religious tradition. Some of that depends upon your own belief and skepticism. Some of that depends upon your own history. Some of it depends on religious experiences that you might or might not have had or know people who have had. But what does that mean for us to encounter Jesus? Another question, where are we supposed to find him? Where are we supposed to go? Do we go out in the wilderness, right? Do you climb a tree? Do you climb a mountain? Do you go to church? Do you stop eating for a month and see what happens? I mean, what do you do to your body? What do you do to your location? What do you do to your mind? Are there things you can do to help you encounter Jesus? And does the Newer Testament play a part in any of this? I know plenty of people who read the New Testament for a living, but never encounter Jesus in the process of doing so, right? Because they're looking for other things. They read it in different ways, looking to uncover certain things. So we want to press this question a little bit this morning, but then certainly off and on throughout the course of this year. How does the Newer Testament play a part in helping us know who Jesus is, which then might help us order our life, order our sense of faith, change the way in which we worship? I'm helped here. Okay, the computer's trying to freeze me out. I'm helped here by thinking about the various ways we talk about Jesus, right? Who Jesus is. So this whom are we looking for? Who do you say I am, right? This question that's framing things. Sometimes we're talking about the earthly Jesus. In other words, we're talking about an actual flesh and blood person from the first century. Jesus of Nazareth, right? The child of Mary, the possible stepson or adopted son of Joseph, and all of a sudden get into bigger questions. Friend of John the Baptist, right? Crucified by the Romans. But there was a person, I mean, unless you're just deeply, deeply skeptical, I think there's really good evidence. There was a person named Jesus of Nazareth, we might call the earthly Jesus. There is no way we can encounter this Jesus short of inventing a time machine, right? We can't go back to the first century and actually see him, ask questions of him, hear his sermons, watch him do things. You know what I mean? We have no first-hand way of encountering somebody who lived 2,000 years ago. But we still talk about him a lot. We preach about him. We sometimes sermons try to help us imagine going back in time and getting a sense of the environment. Sometimes trips to this part of the world ask, what would it have been like? What would it have smelled like? What would it have looked like to be part of this, right? We do kind of imagine that. We also have the textual Jesus. In other words, Jesus is a literary character, at least in 4 Gospels. You might say he's 4 literary characters, right? One of the ways we encounter him is the same way you would read a novel and say, how is this person characterized? What information do we get about him? What's there? What's left out, right? Anybody who reads books knows how to encounter a textual Jesus. The question is, how much of the textual Jesus matches the actual earthly Jesus, right? How do we know that? Well, we've got things like historians. You've got nerds like me who conduct historical research and can kind of reconstruct Jesus and say, well, we're pretty sure he was kind of like a prophet. We're pretty sure he was influenced by these lines of thought and not those lines of thought. We're pretty sure that what the Gospels say here definitely sounds like what we know other people in the first century were saying or doing or experiencing, right? We can apply the tools of history just like we would if we were studying, you know, Calvin Coolidge or anybody else, right? And try to reconstruct that person's life, that ways of thinking, that person's influences. So the Bible matters for the textual Jesus. The Bible matters for the historically reconstructed Jesus. We also have a traditionally mediated Jesus, or probably many traditionally mediated Jesuses. What does the church remember about Jesus? What does the church proclaim about Jesus? And by church here, I mean capital C, right? What kind of person was he? What does it mean to call him fully divine and fully human? How do our hymns matter for this, right? We have hymns about certain stories, about certain things he said, certain things he did. There's also plenty of things about him in the Gospels that nobody writes hymns about because they're either too strange or they don't rhyme. You know, they just don't work for us, right? We have sacralized, we have turned into sacraments things like baptism and Holy Communion, right, which are part of our understanding of who he is, what he did, what he commanded. You see the difference here, right? And certain churches might focus only on certain things Jesus said and did. If you believe Jesus just came simply to point out your sins and to name all of those sins and remind you of them week after week after week, there are churches like that for you that will remember Jesus in that kind of way. If you want Jesus who's nothing about like, you know, you're all great, you're doing a great job, keep at it, we'll see you next Sunday, we could preach to Jesus like that too, right? There's all different ways in which our encounters with this Jesus are mediated by traditions and preaching and the hymns we choose and all of those things, which is why it's so important to choose leaders well in a congregation, right? Amen. And we also have the risen or the contemporary Jesus. In other words, who is Jesus now? And how would you possibly have connection to that? Well, we're not doing communion, but when we do have communion, we talk about Jesus inviting you to a table. So we do in our worship claim that Jesus is accessible, able to be met. Some people have religious experiences of Jesus. There are ways in which we can say we encounter Jesus in our lives. This is deeply subjective for a lot of folks. This is where some people get a little bit nervous. Like, how do you know whose experience of Jesus is authentic and good and helpful and which one's a little bit strange and odd and that we don't want? You could do this. You could talk about the risen and contemporary Jesus and leave the Bible totally out of it. I would argue then that your conception of Jesus will probably be a lot of reflection of your own self. So the Bible, in a way, might kind of set a fence for us, so we kind of know like what kinds of statements about Jesus seem acceptable and which ones might be a little too bizarre or too strange. You know what I mean? We're always looking to the Bible to kind of set norms or to set guidelines, but we also recognize there are ways of encountering Jesus that aren't limited simply to who knows the most verses and can recite them. I'm not sure that's the kind of church we would want to be, where you're led by people who just, can cite verses nonstop. But you see the difference among these. These all intersect in some ways. You can't keep them entirely separate. They overlap. But like any good scheme, what I'm trying to do here is show that there are different ways in which we talk about Jesus, and the Bible matters in some ways more than others for each of these. This is all stolen from a New Testament scholar named Dale Allison, so I just need to put that in there. That's my footnote. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Those 5 different conceptions or kind of ways of thinking about this. We're talking largely about a textual Jesus when we talk about the Gospels, but when we move into things like letters that Paul wrote to churches, he's going to be talking about how do you live with Jesus among you now. He's going to say things like, you are the body of Christ, you collectively. What does that look like? How does that play itself out? How do Christians together decide, determine, discern, what does it mean for us to live out our faith? And we see that in the New Testament in a variety of places as the books open up windows into not all, but some of the experiences of the early church in ways that the church throughout history have said, these are useful texts, these help guide us. Not that we have to necessarily duplicate what Paul told the Corinthians to do, for example, but in ways in which we might now live out the gospel in authentic ways for ourselves and in ways that connect us to our neighbors in the church across the world. We want to talk about this a little bit, and so we're going to free up you now to have some conversations at your tables. If you don't have a table in front of you, turn to 1, 2, or 3 other people if you're willing to do that. If you are online, we have a laptop, and in the chat, you can also use the chat to use this. But we've got 2 questions. We'll give you about 15 minutes to talk about these, some extended time. And one of the questions is this: which of these 5, those 5 ways of thinking about Jesus, do you personally think of most when you think of who Jesus is and how you can know him or how you can know about him? Do you know what I mean? In other words, what kind of pops into your mind when you think of Jesus? Do you go back to the guy in the sandals and the robe in the first century? You think about Jesus among us now. I mean, how does that play itself out? And if you don't know what in the world I'm talking about, you might want to reframe the question of which Jesus do we worship, right? Are we worshiping the Bible? Are we worshiping a literary character? What does it mean to worship a Jesus who's somehow among us today or still a force in the world today, whatever that might mean to you? There's no single answer to this, right? This is going to bring up ways in which you think about Jesus. The second question is this: to describe a way in which the Bible has been helpful for you in encountering Jesus. Or if you don't like that question, you can change it to unhelpful for you in encountering Jesus. We recognize a lot of people have mixed encounters or mixed experiences with the Bible. Some of you have had the Bible used against you in a lot of settings. And one of our hopes for this is to unteach or deteach or reteach those types of passages. Do the questions make sense? Or maybe I should say the questions not make sense to anybody and you think I'm crazy. All right. We're just going to let you go now. Don't leave, but like 15 minutes at your tables. and then we'll call you back and get some feedback. So if there's one particularly organizing person at your table, you can get started. Make sure you know everybody's name as well. And if you need Margaret or myself, just flag us down. We're here to serve. Yeah. Especially, I think
Well, my question is, are there any hymns about spitting?
oh yeah,
Is the spit in any of them?
plenty of hymns that never make it into the Presbyterian.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, they're actually and I don't need to believe it. I kind of mentioned like the whole
Yeah, yeah. I don't.
doing
I
that.
think we just removed it just exactly. Did you want to next?
Either way, we can do it.
You do feedback on it.
Oh, I know. I was telling my staff I can do a small group to see how many people like I want to sit here. So to sit here and stare at my laptop and say,
So which are the things that are but who's
yeah, right.
I'm always inclined towards the text.
Oh,
That's what I.
right.
Where's the next one?
Well, because at the end of the day, the story starts to not
Yeah.
which let's go a little slower. Let's slow down a bit.
We started the day out.
What's funny, he almost says it this bluntly, is the church research. Historical methodology basically says, so we're no help when it comes to baptism. So what do you do? Right? It's kind of like, so what is it? That's the question, right? How much is it? And he's also got a nice mystical idea that near death experience. He's also it's helpful to point out that there's just simply no mention of his name. History is just,
But it does get him ascended. So doesn't forget that.
I like the ascension. That's related to the ascension. Book of Acts.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And he kind of, John kind of has an ascension theology. Even about ascension.
Oh yeah, totally. Definitely. Descending the Son of Man.
Yeah. Christian one, he was faced as a world. He's got a bunch of books out. His terrible cancer. He's got he's got these problems. And I have time nothing. Like, and I remember he showed me there was sort of about this, like, see someone fully kind of relationship. I think it might have been the ascension in it as well. And I just could not, I couldn't even follow the and then after I got the ascension, I still understand that.
I'm sure.
Essentially.
Isn't that?
Yeah. If you ever find somebody
That's what I can do. That's what I can do. I do know a British evangelical who's got a PhD in spatial geography. Different conceptions of space.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. His mostly trying to make sense of how heaven and the ascension is functional facts.
Sure.
Spatial.
Are you talking like outer space? Or you're talking about like atoms and the space between particles.
Oh goodness, space where like it's been a while since I read this stuff. It's like these postmodern geographers, right? They talk about space as like coordinates, right? And they'll talk about the rectangle as space, which also is host social interactions, spatial interactions, recreation for children. How does this function socially? And there's like this other layer where they talk about like what this space make possible and stuff. And so it's kind of how does it extend beyond its whatever. I don't know about this, but it's this idea that space is more than just location. So whatever it means is to ascend. Instead of talking about coordinates or where exactly is he, we're talking more about the new kinds of realities that makes possible.
I'm a little stuck in the coordinates of a lot of space. That's
Maybe,
terrifying.
yeah. Well, it gets to things like how that geography matters. We're talking about the things that go into communities, and maybe what happens when a neighborhood gets cut in half by a freeway. How do you think about it? I mean, it just how it gets imprinted upon economic and political possibilities, but as well as I think they got bored of making maps after a while, and then geography.
That's fair. Yeah.
How much longer do we
I
have?
think we should give them maybe 2 more months.
I'm just gonna note that. We're giving you 2 more minutes. And then you want to just stop me, or maybe I should just remember exactly what time it is to stop this. That's a good round number. That's helpful. I will admit, I looked at the clock and go, am I supposed to stop? Yeah. All right, we're going to bring your conversations to a stop. And what we'd like to do is spend just a few minutes getting some feedback. Maybe at your table you reached a kind of consensus, or maybe at your table there were some very different perspectives, and maybe you feel comfortable reporting that without, betraying personal information from people who don't want you to betray that. But Ken's got a microphone and can circulate around the room if anybody wants to report on what you heard, what struck you in these conversations. Rarely a shy group. I'm super comfortable with silence. It's okay. I can wait you all out. I see. There we go.
Dwayne Cronky, a member of this church since 1981. And just speaking for myself, rather than attempting to synthesize everything that was said here, I think, and who do you say I am, was a question Jesus addressed to his disciples on more than one occasion. And I think that leads to the question, it's not what do you say that I am, how are you doing that in your life to implement those thoughts and the actions, helping others and healing others.
Right. Yeah, how is this more than just an intellectual exercise?
Right.
Thanks, Dwayne. Off to the side, I thought a hand in the back earlier.
I'm here.
Oh, here, yeah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Winga, and those of you who know me know that I kind of look at everything through the eyes of an artist. And I kept thinking how I'd love to look at our collection through these 5 different perspectives. Lots of possibilities.
Yeah, I love that, right? Is something quote unquote true to life, right? But what is something evoke in the imagination? And what do we not have represented in the collection as well? Great question, great perspective.
We had, not surprisingly, a bunch of things in our group, and I'm not
Good.
going to speak for other people, but one of the things that came up is that different communities, you touched on this, if they believe strongly one thing, can kind of push it on someone else and it be, call it traumatic or difficult or whatever. And we also talked about, that I think a number of us felt thinking about the Jesus that walked on the earth is a definite starting point. And then I shared, and many people in this room know Paul Capets and his teaching years ago, and I took a course from him, and the book the topic was One Jesus, Many Christs. And what he talked about is this amazing happening on earth with whatever Jesus was as a person, he was greater than that for the people around him, and that in that world, many different communities experienced him and then tried to figure out what it meant. And each of those communities, or 4 of them, contributed 4 gospels, and they're somewhat different. And that was helpful to me, that even then they were asking the question, who am I? And they came out from slightly different angles as they processed it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. As you move with the microphone, I'll just maybe add to that briefly. Or the question, who do you say I am? You could say that that's also the structure of church history for 2,000 years, right? That's one way we might look at the history of the church. Right? How have Christians responded in ways sometimes awful, in ways sometimes deeply heroic, deeply self-giving, right? And transitioned or transformed the world around them. That part of that is this idea of what does a response to Jesus look like? Yeah.
Yes, our group was actually a living example of what this gentleman was just talking about, because it was striking the multiplicity of the ways in which people encountered Jesus, and that there was someone, I think, in each category throughout the group. So that was very interesting.
Yeah. Of kind of where somebody's center is or where they begin. Yeah.
Yeah. I come to Unity States in 1997 from Morocco, and I grew up reading the Quran, and in the Quran, like Mitri Rahib say last week, that Jesus is the Word and the Spirit of God. So I read it, but I don't understand it until I come here, and I got my first Bible. That's where I read in the book of John that the Word become flesh. That the Word become flesh, and that make me understand that Jesus is the Logos.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, again, 5 or 6 weeks, Gospel of John. What does that mean, right? Jesus is the Word, and how does a Word become flesh? Up here by the doors also, Ken.
Like others have said, we had a variety of places that we encountered Jesus in the different categories, but I was so struck and so moved by individual stories of personal encounters, miraculous occurrences, experiences of forgiveness, other experiences of encountering Jesus in different Bible verses. It was an inspiration, and I just wanted to say that to my group.
Great. Yeah, folks have stories to tell. Sometimes at church we're too buttoned up to tell of our stories, right? But anybody else? Oh, several. Good. See, silence. You can wait people out. You can wait people into speaking.
Our group had a variety of reflections on this. Some of us kind of look at all 5 of these and at one time or another or all together. And the traditional mediated Jesus was a very important part for a couple for whom being part of the church and part of that, what the church teaches, is very instrumental. And others thinking locally and then more broadly about Jesus, and others of us just continuing to ask the question, who are you?
Yeah. Thank you. I think we have time for one more.
One of the things that came up in ours was about the concept of the Trinity and how that plays in, and how that affects, do we encounter Jesus? Do we encounter the Holy Spirit? What are we encountering there? The other was, in some cases, there might be certain verses of the Bible that resonate with us or become part of our mantra or vision or our mission statement for our lives or what have you.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, we've all got passages we like better than others that we build around. And the honest thing is, which are those passages and why, and how do we explore those? So yeah, there will be parts of the New Testament that are also problematic for some of us, and we'll try not to shy away from those, and parts that, some gems that are not often explored. I'm going to hand it over to Margaret. I don't know why this keeps happening.
That's okay.
There we go.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for an excellent first day of discussion of all of this. Matt and I were standing up here just hearing the murmurs around the tables, and I love that this set of sort of 5 ways of encountering Jesus, or of understanding what it means to be encountering him, just generated such a multiplicity of responses. This is one of the ways that I am continuing as one of your associate pastors to get to know this congregation, is hearing how you talk about who Jesus is, and I love opportunities like this one. I am going to switch now to the more logistics end of things, to talk about how do we access this class, what are the resources that are available to help us throughout the year. And I'm going to ask Barbara Mock to come forward to talk about resources available at the library. And Ken, would you be able to supply Barbara with the microphone? Barbara Mock is our librarian here at Westminster and supports this and many other ministry areas with special collections.
Thank you very much. I feel like when I was a kid, they had the annual unveiling of cars with the bigger fins and the brighter colors. This is unveiling the cart for this year. Now, don't worry, the other books are still available for you. They're tucked away on the shelves. And if you find our library a mystery, like many of us do, there are two ways you can find out if we have a book in the library. One, there is a kiosk on the windowsill in the library where you can use it like any other search station. And the entrance or the website for the library is on the adult ed page. So you go to the adult ed page and it says Lowell Library, you'll click on that and you can find out what we have in the library. What you can't find out is whether or not it's actually on the shelves at that time. And that's where I come in, your personal librarian. If you can't find it, give me a call and I'll let you know. But because we don't check books in and out on the system, we don't have an accurate record of actually what's in that particular day that you wanted. But I'll do my best to help you. This, again, who do I say I am? This year's card. For those of you who really want, just want a whole thorough view of the Newer Testament, this textbook right here called Introducing the New Testament is just a good survey. I imagine it's about a college class, don't you think? Not seminary, college. And there are enough pictures to make it fun. And actually what I want to say on here, the things on this shelf cover a wide range of understanding and knowledge. There are some that are seminary level that some of you in here I know can focus on and get a lot out of, and there's things for very good introductory books. One of the heroes of this cart is our very own Matt Skinner. This is his new book that came out in June called The Gospel of... Where is your book? Oh, here it is, Matthew, right here. The Gospel of Promised Blessings. I will have more copies of this, but this is Matt's newest book. I believe it's, unless you were busier this summer than I thought you were, Matt. Now, about 2018, 2019, is that when you did the course with your these books here at Westminster, this series right here? Is that when you did that? About 8 years ago. Well, I have to tell you, there's someone in this community who is a real groupie because we have 6 in this series, and only 1 is on the shelf. I will replace them, but if you have them at home, we have a no fine policy. And please don't walk down the hall and not make eye contact with me because you're embarrassed. You won't believe how often that happens. I walk up to people to ask them how they are, and they say, "Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about the book." I don't remember that. But look, these books for Matt, his companions to the New Testament, were very beloved during that study, and somehow they disappeared. We have books in all the areas right here. But some of my favorites are the archaeology and the historical ones. Kenneth Bailey is a well-known scholar, and this is Poet and Peasant, and Through Peasant Eyes, a literary cultural approach to the parables. Anyway, I'll let you explore so I don't take up any more time, except that you remember everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten? Well, I feel that way about children's books. A really good survey, a really good survey in the children's books kind of can get you focused on what it is you really want to learn. So we have The World of the First Christians and The World Jesus Knew right here. Both are just sort of good to give you an idea of the context of things. So this is just a little bit. The cart will be in the library. Let me know how I can help. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Barbara. Really appreciate the help with this, and we've got great resources for this year. The other person that I'm really excited to introduce or reintroduce is Michael Gold, our administrative assistant for adult education, and he is going to talk about resources available, some of which he has made, to help us through the year. Michael.
Hello, hello. Yes, just like last year, we have a timeline and a bunch of maps and a reading guide back there. The reading guide should look like it looked last year, but we've had a different approach to the timeline. So the big differences are last year for the Older Testament, we had thousands of years to cover that are more or less unfamiliar, where there's like a lot of kind of wild things happening. And I'm also a nerd, so I want to capture all of that. I also had a master's degree in that. I do not have one in the Newer Testament. So I leaned a lot on Matt's knowledge and his help with that. The timeline that you'll see back there is...
Display it for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Is focused more on readability and understanding the relationship between events, which was a fun challenge. So it's a little bit less information dense and a little bit more focused on the Roman era. With Matt's help, we were able to do that. But I think it's exciting. It's great. I got to hunt down a bunch of cute little clip art images to put on there and try to get all kinds of different ones and all sorts of stuff like that.
Here we go.
Yeah, let's do it. See how easy it is to navigate the website and see all the resources? So yeah, you can see here we have these 3 colors that show you kind of what these events are doing. And for me, it was the first time understanding, I guess, being able to see, as I was making it, I was learning things, able to see when certain books came about and who lived when. And it all kind of got muddled up for me, throughout a lifetime of reading the New Testament. And if you're like that, I think this will help you to straighten it out a little bit. We also have lovely maps furnished by Enter the Bible, which is such a helpful resource. And these are the ones that we grabbed because they're the most relevant. But if you like maps, and I really like maps, just go on Enter the Bible and click on the maps. You'll learn so much. Is there anything else you want me to walk people through?
I think, let's see, because the reading guide is accessible
It
on
is.
here too, although I'm not seeing it right now. Yes, it looks like we had a question from Ronnie.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so these ones are the ones that we picked, but enterthebible.org has all kinds of stuff. They have their own timeline. That's a separate resource that I did not make. I just stole from it with credit for this. But it is a wonderful resource that you can click around on if you just want to learn more about the Bible.
Thank you, Michael, for everything that you have done to support this class, and big thanks to Michael for coming in today. We really wanted to put a face for the name. If you have questions about the class, feel free to email Michael. And as we sort of queued up here, the resources are available on the website. Michael also has, at the back of the room, copies of the timeline and copies of the reading guide. It's a little different this year than last year. Last year, the books were so big and long that we wanted to make them kind of less scary. So we pulled out sort of significant chunks from them for those of you who wanted to read along. This year, we actually, if you've got the space and the bandwidth and want to read the whole books, go for it. Read each book. You'll get a lot out of it. But we pulled a couple of specific chapters from each one if you want to delve down deep. That said, this is a class for which there is no homework required. So a lot of the feedback that we got last year was there are so many great resources. We don't have time to use them all. So please know, show up. We hope this will be accessible, whether you've done the reading along or not. But this could be a good opportunity if you're looking to read through the Newer Testament to do so in the context of a larger group of your fellow church members or people who are joining us online who are doing that same thing. Any other? Scholar videos. Matt, you mouthed something to me, but
Maybe comment on our sequence.
Our sequence, yes. So we will be beginning with a next week. We're going to hear from Matt on what is a gospel. Right, we're going to be looking in general at the Gospels as a genre. We can do this year because there's fewer books in the Newer Testament than the older ones, so we have the luxury of kind of pulling out and doing some that are more thematic in nature. Then we'll look at each of the Gospels in turn, along with the book of Acts. Then we'll get a chance to sort of pull some themes out. Themes like, what is the kingdom of God or the reign of God that Jesus is always talking about? What is Jesus' relationship to politics and empire, right? We'll get to pull some themes out. Then we'll transition towards Paul. We'll take a whole week to ask, who is Paul? Paul's going to be a complicated figure for us, and so we'll take some time with that. And then we'll look at the letters in turn. Some will do multiples in 1 week. We'll look at non-Pauline letters as well. Not every letter in the Newer Testament is written by Paul, and we'll end with the book of Revelation. And then Church in the Round in Lent will be a deep dive into a part of Luke's gospel on the Sermon on the Plain. So we've got a good kind of arc of the year coming up. Anything else to add on sort of the scope for that? Okay. And as last year, there will be scholar interviews posted each week. So as you can see here, we've already, this is a placeholder. That video there is from Matt's Between the Testaments class, which if you didn't see that, I would heartily recommend. But this class's video will be posted up there probably on Tuesday. So if you need to access after the fact, you can go to the website. And usually by the end of the day on Tuesday, you can access the class resources. And then the scholar interviews that we do to supplement the class will also appear there. We didn't do one for this intro, but we have a fascinating one for next time about Jesus and Judaism and the relationship of Jesus and Judaism, which will be a theme we'll return to again and again. So I'd heartily recommend that. It was a really fun and really, I think, fruitful conversation with Matthew Thiessen on that question. So any other questions about how to access the materials?